Good morning, everybody, and welcome to CLES's Community Wealth Building Summit 2021. My name is Sarah Longlands, the Chief Executive of CLES, and this is the fourth Community Wealth Building Summit and my first as Chief Executive. And so it's fantastic to see that so many friends, old and new, will be with us over the course of this week. And this event is fully subscribed. It's great that so many of you are excited about the potential of community wealth building to deliver an economically just future for people living right across the UK. And before we begin, I would like to give a really big thank you to our event sponsors, without whom this event would not be possible. So that includes the Barrow Cadbury Trust, Power to Change, and the Democracy Collaborative. Thank you so much for all your support of CLES's work. Just to remind you, we've got a little bit of housekeeping at the start, just to guide us through how this event is going to work. So if you can just bear with me as I run through the information. So first of all, this session is being recorded as well as all the sessions this week, and we will share these recordings with you in coming weeks so that you've got an overview of all that's being discussed and a chance as well, if you want to watch it all again. We have, as I mentioned, a lot of people registered for this event, over 150 people. But we want to try and make this as interactive as possible. So we do have breakouts and workshop sessions throughout the week, and that gives you the opportunity to interact with us and with each other. But we want you to feel as involved as you can be at the plenaries too. So please feel free to use the chat function box at the bottom of your screens to introduce yourselves to the rest of the audience and to us. We will have several opportunities for you to put questions to our speakers over the next couple of hours. Please use the Q&A box to pose these, and you will also be able to upvote and comment on each other's questions too. So please do use this facility, and let's keep the debate lively. And if you prefer, you can also interact with us on Twitter, and the hashtag is #CWB Summit. So I'm going to go through the programme of the week's event shortly, but hopefully by now you should have signed up to join one of our breakouts either this afternoon or the workshops happening in the afternoon on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. And if you've not got the details, please do drop a line to my colleague Lisa Adamson. She's putting her email in the chat right now. And you can also private message her here and she will keep you right. And if you have any other issues, technical or otherwise, just get in touch with Lisa and she will help you with anything that you need. So just briefly to run through how the summit's going to work, because we've got a packed programme and it's the first time we've run the summit over the length of a week. So I just wanted to say a few words about how that's going to work in terms of the plan for today and the rest of the week. So this morning, I'm going to kick off by giving you some brief thoughts from myself a few months in at CLES on the moment that we are in and the role and potential of community wealth building and how we at CLES are working with all of you to think, do, and most importantly, change the economic approach. And then I'm really excited that we are now going to have the opportunity to hear a keynote speech from Mr. Arthur MSP, the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth. And we are really grateful to him for giving us some of his time this morning to talk to us about the work that he is leading in Scotland. Following Tom's speech, there will be a chance for questions, so do use the Q&A box to get these in. Then we're going to have a fantastic panel discussion with my colleague Tom Lloyd-Goodwin, who will be joined by a panel of leaders to discuss how we can build collaborative networks that serve local economies. And Tom and the panel will be taking your questions, so do keep them coming on the Q&A box. And then at the end of this morning, I'm going to close the plenary with a few remarks, and then you get to have a nice long lunch before the breakout panels begin in the afternoon at 2 p.m. So the afternoon panels, one of the great pleasures of becoming the Chief Executive of CLES has been getting to know the team at CLES and learning just about the breadth and depth of work that they do across the UK. And during the course of this week, you'll have the chance to meet them also at our workshop panels. And today we've got 3 workshop panels with a fantastic lineup of speakers. And these sessions have been designed to help really examine how community wealth building provides new ways of addressing complex issues in our areas. So we've got, first of all, creating good jobs with Tom Lloyd-Goodwin. Second, public expenditure as a common good with John Hennigan, and John is also our resident expert in Welsh policy. We've got rethinking land with Rachel Bentley, and Rachel's also our resident expert on finance and community wealth building. So three great sessions. If you haven't signed up for one of them, do make sure you do, because you don't want to miss the chance to take part in what will be a really interesting conversation. And then on Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, we have what we call our deep dive workshops. And we're going to use these to explore how we use community wealth building to really drive positive outcomes for communities. And we're going to be working with a range of experts across lots of different themes to work through live problems supplied to us by our partners in local government. And together, we'll have a chance to think about how we could use community wealth building to tackle these challenges. So these include financing a local energy transition with Antonia Jennings and Ellie Radcliffe, supporting cultural and nighttime economic recovery in a way that builds community wealth with Lauren Bond, David Birch and Oliver Seabaron, and creating new local markets for your target sector. And that's with Fran Jones and a really dear friend of mine and of CLES's, and someone all familiar to you, Neil McEnroy, the former chief executive. So I know that we'll all be keen to hear from him. And then finally, on Friday, we will hear from epidemiologist and activist Kate Pickett on how she sees community wealth building contributing to a more equal society, before we take a step back and reflect on what we've learned this week. So this is a really important point. So if by any chance, parents thought you've started to sort of drift away, come back, because one of the most important things that we want to do this week collectively is explore the radical but realizable actions that you can take to deliver community wealth building in your place. So with that in mind, we are setting you a bit of homework to complete over the course of the week. We know that we want to learn, we know that we want to change things, and we want to know what you've learned and how you're going to put this into action in your area when you leave the summit. And we're calling this, what will you do on Monday? Although we promise we won't hold you to doing it quite that fast. But what we'd like to do is, as you go through this week, try and keep that question at the back of your mind. You know, what am I going to do? What will change as a result of this week? And then when you hit on something, fill out the form telling us about it. And Lisa is posting the link to the form in the chat right now. And we'll remind you lots of times throughout the week. And then on Friday, when we come back together, our closing session, we'll take a look at your responses, and we'll all reflect on what we need to do to really make them happen. And we'll also be sharing some of the select responses on social media too, and you're welcome to share your own. The hashtag, just as a reminder, hashtag CWB Summit, and we are at CLES Think Do on Twitter. So that's all the housekeeping. That's an overview of the summit this week. I'm just going to spend my remaining time before I introduce Mr. Tom Arthur, just giving you some of my thoughts on the moment that we're in. And I mean, it's hard to sum the moment up that we're in. We've got a global pandemic, an environmental crisis, which, you know, threatens life on this planet, growing levels of inequality between people and place, more than 4.3 million children growing up in poverty, local government austerity continuing, and that's even before we get to Brexit, the consequences of which continue to unfold on a daily basis. It's a confluence of many moments, many layers of complexity, and perhaps the only clarity that we have is underpinning it all is a system of economic wealth and power which continues to disproportionately disadvantage the most vulnerable in our society. But you know, CLES have been here before. CLES was formed in a time of crises 35 years ago this year. And we were sparked by the huge changes that were happening in local government at that time, particularly the dissolution of the Greater London Metropolitan Council, along with metropolitan county councils in the West Midlands and Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire. And it was also a year, 1986, when Chernobyl exploded behind the Iron Curtain with the Berlin Wall still intact, the biggest nuclear accident in history. Also in 1986, we had unemployment hit record levels since the pre-war era. We had the 1 millionth council house sold in Scotland 7 years after Right to Buy came in, and bus deregulation began, except in Northern Ireland and London, of course. And our purpose back in 1986 was about how could we provide support and analysis to help local authorities and civil society make sense of the challenges. And we argued that local places needed to have purposeful economic strategies which engaged meaningfully with the challenges so as to improve outcomes for people, all of the people who lived in an area. And today, whilst the challenges may be different and CLES obviously has changed and evolved, the task is very much the same. And I think the really exciting thing is that community wealth building provides one of the most exciting and powerful ways to reconfigure our local economies and deliver positive outcomes for people, place and planet. So just a reminder of what we mean by community wealth building. So when we talk about community wealth building, we see it as a people-based approach to local economic strategy, which works to increase the flow of wealth and power back into local economies. Because unlike conventional approaches to economic development, it builds on the strength of place and it seeks to develop wealth from within and minimize extractive economic activity, which can empty places of their purpose and pride. And community wealth building is about delivering economic inclusion rather than simply growth. And it recognizes that places are more than just a set of productivity stats on a graph, but a rich and complex story of people, identity, and relationships. So how can community wealth building help us to try and make sense of the moment that we're in? One of the lessons of the pandemic during the last 18 months has been the way in which it has revealed the cracked and creaking foundations of our economic system and how it really feels to deliver a better life. And it's time to let the light in between the cracks to reveal a better way of doing things, because indeed the communities that are most vulnerable now are the same communities that have been at the sharp end of economic inequality in recurring sessions over the last 30 years. Time and time again, the response is another area-based programme or another initiative, and now it's not even that, but a vague promise to level up, which still has no official definition or measurement, and a centralised funding pot designed with the next election in mind, rather than the long-term goal of alleviating inequality. And suddenly, the lights have come on and our economic strategies are exposed. Those who are the most vulnerable are not seeing the benefits despite our best efforts. The same areas, the same families, the same communities. And if there was ever a light bulb moment for economic development, this is it. But luckily, we don't need to scrabble around for the answers, because community wealth building provides us with the toolkit to help understand where the wealth is going and how we can divert it back into our communities. Take Islington, for example, where the council have been challenging gentrification by requiring property developers to build 50% affordable housing. And they've also been working really closely with their tech partners to develop more worker-owned cooperatives and increasing the access of women and ethnic minority residents into the tech and digital sectors. Or Birmingham, where CLES have been working with the city's anchor network to help mobilise the wealth of the 7 anchor institutions with a workforce of 50,000, a turnover of 5 billion. And they have pioneered a programme called Hospitality to Health, which has seen workers made redundant in hospitality during the pandemic, given a fresh start in the healthcare sector. And you can find lots more examples like that on CLES's Centre for Excellence webpage, and there should be a link to that coming up now. You'll find lots of great case studies and examples of how people are trying to change things using community wealth building in their own areas. So community wealth building is a bit of a torch for us, a torch to help us see a way through the crises, to let that light through the cracks of our flawed economic approach. But it's also an engine, and this is the second thing I wanted to say about the moment that we're in and community wealth building. Community wealth building can be a real engine for local action. And we believe at CLES, local action is national change, because one of our experiences of the pandemic has been to remind all of us of just how important locality is. Local context matters, and it has directly influenced our ability to absorb the social and economic shock of the pandemic. But it's also where people have found the energy to act. It's given people and places agency. And during the pandemic, despite the best efforts of centralism, it was local authorities, local communities, and their partners who worked together to try and deal with the crises on their doorstep. And it's not only in relation to the pandemic where local areas are pushing for change, but when it comes to the environmental crises, many areas are well ahead of central government policy, and they're using a community wealth building approach to do that, to reach net zero by 2050. Just a few weeks ago, CLES published a new toolkit which shows how councils across the UK, including Oldham, Birmingham and Plymouth to name just a few, are working with local partners to deliver a just energy transition. So community wealth building can be that real engine to give us a sense of direction and purpose for local economic strategies longer term. And thirdly, and finally, community wealth building is really important because of the way in which it shows us that there is an alternative. Because sometimes, and we've all been there, you know, it can be really hard to see an alternative, and we can feel really trapped by the enormity of the challenges we face. Community wealth building gives us choices, and it reminds us that we do not have to keep on hitting our head against a brick wall. Instead, it gives us new bricks, the building blocks to start creating something different. A better strategy is possible, and indeed, we've now worked with more than 60 local authorities across the UK who all think that a better way is possible too. And our communities of practice are full of people from across the UK who are working hard to try and implement community wealth building and use these discussions to problem solve, to share knowledge and intelligence about what is working in their areas. And the number of local authority officers with a designated community wealth building role has grown exponentially, not forgetting our very own CLES community wealth builders in residence, Conrad Parks in Birmingham and Lauren Bond in Sandwell. And we are hoping to launch our new school of community wealth building in 2022. But perhaps it's the work that's going on in Scotland that speaks to just how far community wealth building has come, because the Scottish Government have shown real leadership in championing community wealth building as a driver of a well-being economy. And CLES have had the privilege of working with 5 pilot areas across Scotland during the last 12 months. And we'll be publishing our thoughts on the lessons from this work for community wealth building later this week. And our work in Scotland has looked at a range of tricky and wicked issues, including vacant and derelict land in the Glasgow City region, food cooperatives in the Western Isle, retrofit in the south of Scotland, and gender justice in Clackmannanshire. And in Fife, we've been looking at how community wealth building can form the basis of a strategy to address poverty and inequality and the climate emergency. And we found evidence that a focus and a delivery mechanism of community wealth building is beginning to deliver real change. So, for example, in Fife, community wealth building is now the key element underpinning the locality's approach to the economy, to economic recovery, poverty, and the climate emergency. In Clackmannanshire, community wealth building for gender justice is now a defining principle that has been applied to economic development to enable women and girls to achieve their full potential. And so it's with great pleasure that I now welcome Mr. Tom Arthur, the MSP, the Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth in the Scottish Government. And Tom is the first government minister, we think, in the world to hold a title with community wealth included as part of their portfolio. And it's for that reason that we were so keen to hear him speak at this year's Community Wealth Building Conference, because of the way in which Scotland is really blazing a trail by using the power of community wealth building to deliver an economy founded on well-being rather than simply growth. So Mr. Tom Arthur was elected to the Scottish Parliament in May 2016 as the MSP for Renfrewshire. So thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Arthur, and welcome to the CLES 2021 Community Wealth Building Summit. And over to you. Thank you very much.
Sarah, thank you very much for that kind welcome and what was an inspirational set of remarks. Between listening to what you were saying and seeing the comments in the chat bar reflecting the range of people from a range of sectors now involved in community wealth building, this is really a very exciting time, and I'm tempted just to wipe my diary for the rest of the week and spend it with you at the summit. And I'm sure that there will be a lively debate and discussion over the course of the coming days, both on wicked issues, but also on the innovative solutions that community wealth building can provide. And I know that CLES, as you had mentioned, has been spearheading community wealth building over a number of years and has helped us here in Scotland with some of our pilot work. And of course, as you referenced earlier, your CLES colleague Neil McEnroy has been seconded to help take community wealth building forward in Scotland. I think with the time I've got this morning, I'm keen to share why and how we are advancing the community wealth building model to support economic development in our local areas, to recover from the health, social and economic impacts of the pandemic. And now, more than ever, as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to enable an economic system that delivers for everyone and for every place. And so I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share some of our progress. Now, we are obviously just a few hours really following the conclusion of COP26 in Glasgow, just a few miles from where I'm talking to you now. And Scotland, like all nations, faces the challenge of making the economic transition to a new industrial future that works for people, place and planet. Community wealth building was adopted by Scotland as a key means by which we can practically deliver on this future, building a genuine and tangible wellbeing economy in which all people in Scotland enjoy greater wealth, health and opportunity. We see the community wealth building model in Scotland as a way to deliver on these ambitions, ensuring that local people and businesses have a genuine stake in producing, owning and enjoying the wealth that they create. In adopting community wealth building, we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper, as we have been developing associated policies and projects over a number of years. And to be candid, decades. I know this was something that you touched on in your remarks, Sarah, going back 35 years ago. I'm very conscious as the MSP for Renfrewshire South that I have Linwood in my constituency, and Linwood is an area that is synonymous with deindustrialisation, immortalised in the Proclaimer's song Letter for America. And as a constituency MSP over the past 5.5 years, I've seen the legacy of that deindustrialisation, but I've also seen the response from the community as well, which has inspired me. And seeing that community wealth building model in action, coming from the bottom up, from the grassroots, people in Linwood taking ownership of their own future. And so community wealth building presents a broader opportunity in the work we're doing through the Scottish Government to support those local endeavours. And we already have a strong community wealth building ethos in Scotland. And that is why in the relatively early days of community wealth building here, all partners are keen to contribute to advancing the application of the model. However, and this is key, the crucial role of community wealth building for us is to add value to what we are already doing. And through the 5-pillar model adopted from the work with CLES, we want to scale up actions and achieve better outcomes. The Scottish Government is clear that community wealth building is a place-focused economic policy with a clear aim to foster inclusive growth. At the heart of the community wealth building approach and our ethos is a recognition that redistribution of wealth, while the right thing to do and necessary, only goes so far. We seek to pre-distribute wealth by growing the number of people in Scotland who have a greater ownership stake in the Scottish economy, and in doing so, tackle structural inequality. Just one illustration of what I'm talking about here is enabling access to new opportunities to work, and receive a fair wage for that work and enjoy a secure contract. Community wealth building provides national and local government, the third and private sectors and communities with an opportunity to approach economic development in a new way that accepts that doing business is a vital part of the way Scotland works. However, community wealth building challenges us to conduct business in a way that enables common prosperity, creating conditions for people and communities in Scotland to own a greater stake in local economies and shared wealth. Our developmental approach in Scotland has been focused on three connected elements: practice, policy and movement building. Firstly, practice. It's just about getting stuff done. With CLES's help, we have applied the community wealth building model in places and sectors across Scotland, reflective of the diversity of our nation. This approach is supporting us to learn how community wealth building works in both rural and urban areas, as well as in various sectors. This approach will help identify how we enable and overcome blocks essential to support our plans to scale up community wealth building. As such, we have seen important and significant progress made in several pilot localities and regions over the past 5 years, as Sarah referenced. This includes the Ayrshire region alongside 5 other areas, like Carmarthenshire, south of Scotland, Western Isles, Tay cities in Fife, and the Glasgow City region. Alongside this pilot work, the Scottish Government committed £3 million to advance community wealth building across the Ayrshire region through the Ayrshire Growth Deal. North Ayrshire's first community wealth building annual report, published last month, evidences the benefits community wealth building can deliver for communities, such as the development of 2 new solar photovoltaic farms and providing tailored support in the tender process that enabled multiple local businesses to win significant public contracts. The testament to the success and popularity of community wealth building is how we are seeing this model extending into other areas, including South Lanarkshire, Moray, East Renfrewshire, Highland, West Lothian, Edinburgh and the South East Scotland region, and Dundee City. Around a third of all local authorities in Scotland have or are developing action plans with significant community wealth building activity. Industry sectors are also integrating community wealth building principles into their development and delivery approaches. Health and social care are looking at how they can reduce inequalities through more imaginative use of their contracts, recruitment and physical assets. Housing has committed to taking a community wealth building approach to deliver wider economic benefits through their investment as set out in our Housing to 2040 strategy. We have also built community wealth building principles into the funding criteria for our Clyde mission supported projects, and it will be a core part of the scoring criteria for the £1 million Islands Community Fund. Of course, with practice, we need to learn and share what is working, the creative and innovative approaches that are emerging. This is happening through the Scottish Centre for Regional Inclusive Growth, and in partnership with the Economic Development Association Scotland, we will continue to share best practice, creating a community of practice and build capacity. Second element I want to touch on is policy. Through our community wealth building team, we have sought to create touch points with other policy areas within and out with government relevant to the 5 pillars of community wealth building. While the thought of civil servants talking to each other might not sound too exciting, at least to people outside this virtual room, it is important to driving community wealth building across Scotland, given the models focused on real places affected by a very wide range of policy and funding decisions by government, local and national. So from community planning through agendas relating to local government, regeneration, fair work, land reform, finance, growth deal, cities policy, and so on, we are creating a collective community wealth ethos across the Scottish Government. And I think that's an important point. Sarah mentioned it as Minister, I'm leading on community wealth building, but responsibility for community wealth building sits right across government, and every portfolio and every minister is conscious of the need to explore ways in how their portfolio and their responsibilities can deliver on the community wealth building agenda. The third point I wanted to raise was movement building. Community wealth building as a model is a clear way of building a place-focused approach to local economic development with people at its heart. We have worked hard to get out there, promoting community wealth building, learning and sharing how it can help. There is a community wealth building movement and ethos growing across Scotland, with many people framing and using its language and terms. We have had positive engagement with the Confederation of Scottish Local Authorities, EDAS, and the Improvement Service, working collectively towards making community wealth building the vehicle to deliver more locally bespoke, inclusive economic solutions, but as consistent with national economic ambition in Scotland. I would like to briefly pick up some of the key highlights so far in making progress with the model at large and its 5 pillars. Turning to questions of land and property, we have a growing recognition of the role of community assets and their productive potential. This aspect is clearly in evidence in community land trust activity in, for example, the Western Isles, and work across communities in urban Scotland, especially in relation to vacant and derelict land in Glasgow City, and the growth of community energy production as seen in North Ayrshire. Looking at workforce in Fife and Clackmannanshire, we are building on our national Fair Work agenda to create Fair Work charters, working to ensure we cement living hours and living wage practice across local labour markets. In finance, there is a greater recognition of how investment must play into a community wealth building ethos. For instance, we are seeing this in the greater alignment and joining up of funds locally, including the joining up of funding for derelict land and deploying a community wealth building lens to Scottish Government and UK Government funding, such as through the growth deals. We are experiencing a deepening in growth of employee and other forms of inclusive ownership. This includes community wealth building work in Glasgow City region and south of Scotland, where there is growing inclusive ownership as part of public sector supply chain in the procurement and commissioning of services. As regards sustainable procurement, there is a range of innovations under the orbit of community wealth building. Central to this is solidifying links between procurement and commissioning with economic development. Specific progressive improvements include innovations such as the community wish list developed by Perth and Kinross Council. This means that communities decide what community benefits contractors should deliver, and has now been rolled out in a number of other areas, where North Ayrshire are developing a community-facing portal with a wish list of ways in which the community would like to be supported. As set out in our recently published COVID recovery strategy, we're going to support all 32 local authorities over the next 18 months to develop their own community wealth building plans. The programme for government this year commits us to developing a community wealth building bill during this Parliament to consolidate changes in practice, enabling local anchor organisations to use their economic leverage to deliver more for local people and communities. The community wealth building legislation will cement and augment the role local authorities and other local anchor institutions can play in advancing the wellbeing economy, mandating public service delivery to support economic development. I'm very much looking forward to working in a collaborative way with fellow MSPs across the parties represented at Holyrood, and I think there really is an opportunity for genuine cross-party collaboration and buy-in. I look forward to working with our local anchor organisations as part of community plan partnerships, and they must be empowered to recognise their purpose as economic agents for change, as purchasers, employers and holders of land and property assets. So in conclusion, community wealth building offers us a new option, some way to reshape and rebalance our local economies and our society to value all of the assets and talents of our people. It needs our whole system to align behind this, and for us to think about how we move away from arbitrary targets and drive behaviours into a rethink about how we value and what we value as a society, how we measure it, and how we use that to drive positive change. Final point I'd like to make is just really picking up on what Sarah said. We are at a moment, and I'm conscious that in our lifetimes, in the lifetimes of our parents and grandparents, there was perhaps 2 or 3 signal events. There was 1945, which represented a change, 1979, and of course 1989 and 2001 in their own ways were significant markers in the development of our societies, and will perhaps be characterised by historians as key turning points. But I think out of this experience of the pandemic, we have to take this opportunity to build something new. And I think this is community wealth building can be at the heart of this, of fundamentally not just reshaping our economies, but reshaping our society. And from the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, those reflections that we take forward upon what really matters, well, the way to make that a reality in our economic thinking, I think, can only be achieved through community wealth building. So it's something I'm very much looking forward to taking forward over my tenure as Minister for Community Wealth Building. I may potentially be the first minister to have that title, but I'm sure I'm not going to be the last. And I very much look forward to continued partnership, working with all of the key stakeholders, local authorities, anchor institutions, key partners in the private sector and the third sector as well across Scotland, and indeed continued dialogue with partners across the UK. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here this morning and just share a few of these thoughts. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Arthur. Such a rich and interesting overview of community wealth building in Scotland, and hugely inspirational. I mean, I was really taken by your point about that it's not just about a single act, it's about a whole system approach, and it's about delivering that common prosperity. And I really agree with you at the end there. You know, the pandemic and the crises that we have lived through and we are continuing to deal with is really forcing us to question, you know, what really does matter and how we achieve it. So thank you very much for that. And I know that everyone across the UK will be so interested in hearing what is happening in Scotland, and hopefully be inspired to do something similar in their own areas. So we've got some questions coming through on the chat, on the Q&A box, which is fantastic. So if it's okay, Mr. Arthur, we'll maybe just spend a few minutes just exploring some of these. So we have a question there from, we've got, let's see, from Mary Patel, who's asking, with public procurement rules being rewritten following Brexit, what additional scope do you see this allowing for a distinctive Scottish approach? So I don't know if you want to take that one.
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the we're in Scotland are committed to using the powers that we have to the maximum extent. So, for example, around we have a fair work first approach around grants, but there's a whole range of powers that we don't have that are reserved to Westminster, and there's also a degree of uncertainty about what the procurement landscape is going to look like. We are. I want to resist the temptation to be overtly political, but I will just say that Brexit seems anything but done. It's an ongoing live issue, and what the implications are going forward are difficult to tell. So we will seek to, as this landscape evolves and develops, which is contingent upon decisions taken at Westminster and the approach that the UK government is going to take, we will seek to max our powers to fullest. It will come as obviously no surprise, given the Scottish Government's position. My political view is I would much rather see Scotland had these full suite of powers. But what we are committed to doing is within the devolved framework, seeking to maximise what is available to us. But equally, we recognise that desire to have that greater flexibility and to make sure we are harnessing the power of procurement to deliver on community wealth building. It's not just something that local authorities in Scotland and the Scottish Government wish to do. There's a shared agenda right across the UK, and as you will be aware, we are very keen in the Scottish Government to work collaboratively where possible in advancing that agenda. But clearly, we're in a position right now where what we can do is ultimately going to be limited by decisions taken by the UK government. So let's hope that we can see more buy-in from the UK government on the community wealth building agenda, and that will help to enable us all right across the UK to really flex these procurement powers.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I mean, one of my observations since coming into this role is that just how commitment and how much buy-in there is for community wealth building in Scotland, but also in Wales through their focus on the foundational economy, and in Northern Ireland also. So yeah, let's hope that some of this starts to knock on the door of Westminster also. Just on that, there is a question here from Debbie Pippard who asks, you know, as you say, there's plenty for people across the political spectrum to like about the approach, but how have you managed to bring people who are on board who are perhaps sceptical or for whom the model resonates less strongly? I don't know if you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah, do you know, it's a good question. I suppose one thing I do is, and one thing that I was very clear when I was appointed, I've got quite a wide-ranging portfolio with public finance, planning, also in my title, and then there's other areas that I cover from retail strategy to so that limited devolved powers over consumer rights that we have in the Scottish Parliament. And I've been very clear that from the outset, I wanted to make sure my portfolio was working holistically and joined up, and making sure that community wealth building was a thread that ran right across that. So in terms of perhaps the non-political actors, in terms of engaging with stakeholders, community wealth building is something that I bring up at every opportunity. We recently, just last week, I published our draft National Planning Framework 4, which is probably the most significant development in the planning system in Scotland, out with legislation in the last, certainly in decades, but potentially since 1948. And it will form part of, once it's adopted, the overall development plan for Scotland. And in terms of our planning policies, we have 6 overarching policies under the heading of sustainability, and community wealth building is one of those policies. So again, that affords me opportunities to engage with stakeholders. What's interesting at the moment is, in terms of within the context of the Scottish Parliament, I've sought to use opportunities often in answering questions from members in other areas to flag up the potential that community wealth building brings to the table, and addressing a lot of other issues. So for example, when questions come up around the future of the high street or town centres, yes, there's a lot of interventions that take place there through capital grant funding, through planning, through support for business, retail strategy, but community wealth building has a big role to play. So I take every opportunity to flag it up in a positive light. But I think where we're very much at the moment we're in right now in Scotland is that this has been driven at a local level. And one of the things that's very important to me is this has to be from the bottom up. It cannot be something that's imposed, and that's why we're not looking towards legislation until later in the Parliament. There's some incredible work going on, but it varies as it reflects the localities and different priorities of different local authorities, and that can be for a range of different factors. There can be different pillars that some areas are wanting to focus on, but there's obviously the difference between rural, semi-rural, urban geographies, which is reflected in the approaches. So we want that process of cumulative learning. But the final point I want to make, and I apologise for this being a slightly longer answer than I intended, but we are seeing within local authorities partnership working between different parties, and that is very encouraging. So I want to see that cross-party approach that is evident at local government level be something that we carry to Holyrood once we get into a place where we're starting to introduce legislation on community wealth building later in this session. And I think by the time we get to that point, there's already so much momentum. We've got the commitment over the next 18 months to help to support all local authorities in developing community wealth building plans. So I think by the point we get there, there will be a grassroots political consensus. And then what we do at Holyrood, it's not a question of principle, it's about how we make sure the legislation delivers the maximum possible within the powers that we have available.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned about the sort of importance of stakeholders, the importance of bringing people on board. We have a question there from David Randall, and it's also reflected in some of the other questions, which is something that we've been exploring at CLES as well. And David asks, do you see, what response, I guess, do you see from the private sector to the challenge of community development? And there's a similar question about, how can we involve and make sure we're understanding the role of the private sector within a community wealth building approach. So I don't know if you mentioned that in your remarks already, but I'd be interested if you want to elaborate on that. That'd be fantastic.
I would offer two reflections. Those who are familiar with the term, and there is still a bit of disconnect. I think sometimes the private sector, community wealth building can seem a bit too, it's the lexicon of the public sector, and that's, you know, certainly something I'm seeking to tackle in every conversation I have. But the two reflections I would give is those who are aware of it, are enthusiastic about it, have been proactively contacted by industry bodies want to discuss community wealth building. Those who are not familiar, when it's explained to them, they start to think, well, we do a bit of that already, and we'd be keen to see how we can do more of it. So there's clear opportunities there. I made just reference to the draft national planning framework. One of the policies would require that for some major housing developments, 50 housing homes or more, would have to require a community benefit statement. Now, developers are already looking at ways in which they can support community wealth building through hiring people locally, procurement from more local suppliers, etc. So there's opportunities there, and I think that we're not able to deliver the vision of community wealth building without buy-in from the private sector, and to, particularly around procurement and finance as well. But I think there's an appetite there for it. I think there's a recognition that change is coming, and I think they will want to be part of it. And we want to be part of it really from the ground up, and to be involved in helping to play their part in shaping that agenda. So I'm very much I'm very positive about the role the private sector can play. I think it's essential. I think it has to be real, sustained and deep philosophical buy-in. This cannot just be another set of buzzwords and a sort of term, community washing, so to speak. It has to be meaningful and deep, and that's key, and I'm very much cognizant of that. But I think there's a real opportunity there, particularly amongst SMEs. We see a real opportunity as well. So I think we have the potential to do something that will be intrinsically important, not just in the sustainability of community wealth building, but in affecting that cultural change and effectively rewiring how we're thinking about economics. Because I think the place we all want to get to is where it's not something that you have to, community wealth building isn't something that public bodies, third sector, private sector have to consciously think about doing. It just gets to a place where it's natural, it's how we do things. And so having that engagement is important. And from the early conversations I've had in the 6 months since I was appointed, I'm very encouraged by the noises that I've heard from the private sector. So it's just important to kind of keep that collaborative approach and to recognise the flexibility that exists within the community wealth building model. And again, so that process of learning from local authorities as they develop and pilot their programmes, part of that learning process will be the engagement with the private sector that takes place through that, and more generally. So yeah, to sort of summarise, I'm very positive about where we can get to. It's going to take a lot of work, it's going to take patience, but I'm very positive about where we can get to.
Fantastic. We unfortunately we've just kind of run out of time. There's lots of other questions on there, and obviously what you've said sparked lots of ideas and thoughts amongst people in the audience. And I know there's a question there, for example, about capacity support. I know that there are plans afoot to explore that in the longer term. There's questions about community-led community wealth building in the future. So lots more food for thought on there for all of us. And I think everyone has really enjoyed listening to you this morning, Mr. Arthur. And thank you so much for giving us your time and for inspiring us with just how extensive and well thought through the approach to community wealth building has been in Scotland. So I'm going to bring it to a close there. And apologies that I didn't manage to get through all of the questions before the end of this session. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Tom Lloyd-Goodwin, who is going to be hosting a fantastic panel of speakers exploring how we build local coalitions for a community wealth building fueled recovery. So over to you, Tom, and thanks very much.
Brilliant. How are we all doing, everybody? Yeah, good morning. I'm Tom Lloyd-Goodwin. I'm Associate Director of Policy here at CLES, and I'd like to offer you a very, very warm welcome. So a really big thank you for joining us here today for the first of our panel sessions then, which is of course entitled Leading the Charge, Building Local Coalitions for a Community Wealth Building Fueled Recovery. So The purpose of this session, then, really in a nutshell, is to give you a little bit of insight into how the community wealth building movement is being pioneered in different sectors, in different places, and how this is giving rise to and could potentially give rise to more partnerships and coalitions to really start to scale up and amplify the community wealth building agenda. So to this end, I am delighted to be joined by this stellar lineup who are rapidly appearing on the top of my screen. I hope that you can see them all too. They'll of course get a chance to say hello and talk to you properly in a moment, but let me just do a quick kind of introduction to them all. So first of all, we've got Alison McKenzie-Folan, who is of course Chief Executive of Wigan Council. So Alison's got over 30 years of experience across local government, the civil service, the NHS. She was previously Deputy Chief Executive at Wigan Council, where she had responsibility for a range of services, including corporate policy, and she's developed many of the council's key transformation programmes. And she's also been integral to the role that has been played with respect to place-based working across the borough. We're joined today by Sarah Evans. Sarah is Commercial Director of the Wales Co-operative Centre. She's also an independent policy and research advisor and an expert in the social business sector. So in recent years, Sarah has travelled across Europe conducting research into the development of socially trading businesses such as social enterprises. We've got Sam Scharf here today, who is Director of Housing and Customer Service at C&C Housing. So he joined C&C earlier this year from Orbit Group Housing Association, where he was Director of Communities and Sustainability. So Sam has focused extensively on social investment in housing, as well as the development of supply chains to incorporate more social business. And lastly, and by certainly no means least, we've got Donna McLaughlin, who is Director of Social Value at the Northern Care Alliance Foundation Trust, which is an amalgamation of Salford Royal and the Pennine Acute Trust. So she joined the Northern Care Alliance in April 2017. Prior to this, she was Director of Operations at St Helens and Knowsley, NHS Teaching Hospital, and the Royal Liverpool and Broad Green Hospitals NHS Trust. Okay, so we're going to get things moving in a moment, but let me just go over a little bit of that housekeeping that Sarah just mentioned before, because it does kind of relate to this session as well. It is all very straightforward. You've done it before. We're going to be recording this. You can watch it back at your leisure if you want to. As Sarah said, we do want you to be as involved as you can. So continue to introduce yourselves using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. But if you've got questions, and please do pose your questions to our panelists, use the Q&A box to do these, and you can, as Sarah said, upvote. You can comment on people's questions too. So yeah, use that to keep the debate lively. In terms of how we'll run the next hour or so then, so I'll begin in a minute just with a very little brief bit of context behind the session. I'll then get our panelists to do around 5 minutes each on how they're applying community wealth building in their sectors and their places. I'll probably ask a few follow-up questions, and then after that we should have plenty of time to take questions from your good selves out in the audience before we wrap up at about 11:55 a.m. So I hope that sounds okay. So let me just start with a bit of context then. So the reason why we're focusing heavily on partnerships in this session and bringing together voices from different sectors is because we really see collaboration as a key mechanism for addressing that moment that we now find ourselves in that Sarah was reflecting on earlier this morning. So in other words, this confluence of crises, recovery from COVID, responding to climate emergency and environmental breakdown, and addressing what we're seeing as record levels of poverty, deprivation and inequality. Now, of course, we've just heard from Mr. Tom Arthur this morning about the fantastic work that's going on in Scotland around community wealth building and that real conducive national policy framework that's starting to emerge in Scotland. And it's very much part of the reason there why, of course, community wealth building is advancing at pace. In Westminster, though, as we've kind of been intimating, the economic model prescribed by the Treasury is to some extent holding us back, particularly in an English context. And this means that we've got to work harder than ever, really, to find those progressive gaps that we can crawl into and engineer interventions to address this moment that we now find ourselves in. As you know, at CLES, we're all about trying to, I always say this, we're all about trying to find these kind of progressive spaces that can really help localities to scale and amplify community wealth building practice. And to this end, earlier this year, we published a paper called Devolve, Redirect and Democratise, and this should get posted in the chat as I speak, which was in essence both a critique of the current national UK devolution policy that we have, as well as that traditional approach to local economic development practice, which tends to focus on property development-led regeneration and this kind of real focus on GDP growth. And as a follow-up to that paper, we're currently doing some research into the capacity of local economic development to start to do things differently. And this is the link really, is that we very much see this session as tying into that, because what we're hearing on the ground is that local government can't solve these challenges on its own. It needs to have its partners around the table to find imaginative community wealth building solutions that will hopefully deliver real change for people, for place and planet. Particularly partners from other sectors such as housing, the NHS and the social business sector that we have before you today. Now, I could go on, but I'm not going to. I'm going to hand over to our speakers here to get their input. So, Alison, if we could start with you then, if you could tell us about your experience of developing community wealth building in Wigan, that would be brilliant.
Oh, thanks, Tom, and good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be part of the discussion this morning and share some of our experiences in Wigan. I can't do that first without Tom giving a big shout out to CLES in particular. Thank you so much to CLES, the whole of the CLES team, but the star of the show for us was Fran, because Fran became part of the Wigan family, and I think what Fran did and what CLES has certainly done for Wigan is, I suppose, helped us become a bit more bold and courageous, and really facilitated some of our conversations. She's really helped, the CLES has helped us, and Fran has helped us in terms of particularly some of the partnership conversations, but also really give us some deeper insight, and in particular bring CLES learning to Wigan. So yeah, this is a bit of a joint approach between CLES and Wigan. So for those who haven't heard the Wigan story, we've been working on the Wigan deal for the last 10 years, and that's really around shifting ourselves to be much more about relationships, communities, co-production, and really moving from probably what was quite a traditional paternalistic local authority into a much more enabling, a much more listening authority, and one that wants to invest in communities and look for solutions. So taking a real sort of positive asset-based approach through the course of austerity, which led to some amazing relationships and partnerships, not only with our other public sector partners, but the private sector, and really, really importantly, the community sector. So for us, community wealth building is really the next phase of the deal, and a much sharper focus and challenge for us in Wigan around how do we grow economy that works for all of the people of our borough. And that's really where CLES and Fran and the team have been helping us. So it's that next chapter, and what we've been trying to do is really concentrate on what that means, particularly for places like Wigan. Certainly reports such as the Industrial Community Alliance report is suggesting places like Wigan will be the worst hit from the pandemic, and some of the growth and some of the great work that we've seen over the last 10 years is going to be potentially effectively wiped out by what's happened during COVID. And certainly we're not an area that's going to benefit from national economics of trickle-down economics for us. We need to take control. We need to work in a much deeper partnership to set a different course, and that's what we've been trying to do. So for community wealth building is part of our post-pandemic recovery, but it's a real sort of profound change in what we're trying to do here, and I suppose tackling some of that inequality head on and putting some significant resources behind it in terms of what we're trying to do. So we're seeing a wealth of co-ops growing, mutually owned businesses, small to medium enterprises, and they're going to play a much bigger role in our economy and our communities, and really trying to create that wealth that benefits everybody. So for us, it has been around, it isn't just about the public sector, it has been a borough-wide social movement, and it's becoming part of how we do things in Wigan. So rather than see this as a sort of individual programme or another initiative, it's sort of really rooted in everything that we're trying to do. It's got incredible political support from the leader and the deputy leader and all of our partners. And I think what we have tried to do is really build that partnership approach. So we're seeing it as getting high level commitment from all of the anchor partnerships, so public sector partners in particular, so the local hospital, the local college, and all of those partners coming together. I think what we've also tried to do is see our staff as part of the future. So we employ over 4,000 staff, and they're all becoming community wealth building ambassadors. so that we've really used our staff as a sort of part of the social movement, and they are really inspired by this movement. So we've already had guru sessions where staff can really start to understand, so what does community wealth building mean for their part of the organisation. It really fits with our behaviours in the council around that permission to innovate and that permission to really think about being courageous and bold and working alongside communities. And as I say, we've had that real great political support. Tom, I was asked to mention a little bit around the adult social care market, because this is where we've done some early work around reshaping what it means in the social care market. So we've gone from 15 to 5 day centres, but through that we've actually developed in a very much in a partnership way social enterprises in adult social care. And what we've done in terms of that market development is really raise standards and boosted the economy by commissioning completely different through an ethical home care framework. And we've developed a real landscape of small to medium enterprises, so not the large providers. We've seen that system come together where what we had previously was really variable quality, cost, quite really completely disconnected from local communities and really poorly valued and recognised workforce. So what the ethical home care framework has done is really change that model with our providers. It's much more about co-design, it's much more about affordability and sustainability, but we've also been respectful of people having a return on their business and what that means to ensure in terms of investment. So we've really had a selection process that's focused in on community wealth building, it's focused in on values. And we've put a sort of strong procurement model in place to make sure that we do that robust thinking process. Again, using the work of CLES to help us on that. And what we've tried to do is sort of zoom in on sort of manageable areas, geographical areas that's much more connected across where we can increase productivity, get local businesses connected to local communities, and also really help with the green agenda and those climate emissions. We're really working hard on our anchor partnerships. So we've been working across community wealth building on employment opportunities. We've been looking at new and innovative ways of looking at housing solutions. And we've been doing some really exciting things in terms of our procurement and commissioning over the last couple of months. We've also focused in on making sure that we really, think about what it means in terms of our partners. So we've built up a family of anchor institutions, and Mr. Arthur Tom mentioned around the private sector. We've certainly worked alongside the private sector as seeing them part of this partnership. And we've got some really great practitioner groups. We've got an anchor partner procurement practitioner group that starts to look at small to medium enterprises and social businesses and thinking about how they can bid for contracts. We've established a business consortium that's really working with the private sector to develop that sort of fantastic ecosystem and thinking about how we unlock procurement and our commissioning intentions. And we're really starting to see some traction now. So we've seen a shift in the last 12 months where the council and the college have increased spend with local businesses by 23%. And what we're trying to do is really maximise what we've got in terms of our £1 billion spend of the public sector. So I think I'm conscious of time, and I know other colleagues have got some great things to say. So for us, there's huge potential for us in terms of unlocking what we can do, particularly linked to some of those social determinants of health. And we've also got some great examples of working with the hospital, local university and the local college on thinking about particularly health and social care skills and what that means for sustainable careers with supporting partners. So it's definitely something that we want to be bold and courageous about. I'm really excited about this next phase of work and what we can achieve together. Certainly the ambition's big and we can be really energised by it. I think it's an enormous agenda and something that we need to get traction on. So for us now, we're focusing on actions, our action plan. And, a big thanks to CLES for helping us focus down. So it's been great to have a few minutes. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and listening to other colleagues. Cheers, Tom.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, no, and it's been a real inspiration, obviously, to work with yourselves as well and to, see that real root and branch transformation that's going on there, that strong intent from both officers and from members to kind of take forward community wealth building initiatives. It's been really great. Sarah, if we could maybe hear from you next. Yeah, obviously the role of socially generative businesses in taking forward community wealth building is so important. So it'd be great to hear about how you've worked to develop these kind of businesses and where you see the opportunity to grow this approach. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. Gosh, some really great speakers this morning. So really want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in Wales. We've heard from Scotland. We've heard a little bit about what's going on in the UK more generally. But it'd be really good to present a picture of Wales. First of all, just tell you a little bit about Wales Co-operative Centre. We run Social Business Wales, which has been a European funded programme to support the social business sector here. We run a New Start programme, we also run a growth programme, and we're also involved in Employee Ownership Wales as well. So I think that just presents a bit of a picture of why we've been working with the CLES team here in Wales. So in terms of Welsh Government's approach, when they've been looking at community wealth building, they've really focused on the procurement element at the moment. So that's fitting very much in with their foundation economy approach, which I think Sarah alluded to in her opening comments. But also in Wales, I think it's really important to discuss our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. That's a really unique piece of legislation in the world. And, you know, there's a number of wellbeing goals in there that's talking about a prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales. We're looking at a more equal Wales, things that really resonate with community wealth building, but also there's ways of working within that act about being collaborative, thinking long term, that can really benefit our communities. So in terms of that, as I said, the focus in Wales has very much been on procurement, and annually there's a 6.3 billion spend within the public sector, within our 22 local authorities and our 7 health boards. And we've been working with CLES on a Welsh Government contract, looking at how we can really get that, get social businesses involved in the public sector supply chains. What's been noticed so far by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act Commissioner and the various reviews that she's done to date is that when the public sector are going out to procurement, it's very much short-term planning, real short-termism in terms of their approach. Within all of our public bodies as well, there's a real lack of consistency in how procurement is actually happening, but also the evaluation measures that are being part of that procurement, which again really affects, you know, when we're trying to really embed social business in the third sector. You know, there are really amazing examples of innovation. You know, listening to Alison about what's been going on in Wigan, you know, we've got really great examples of that in Wales, but what we're not good at is joining that up and letting others know about it. You know, there also, you know, there is this perception that it's cheaper to procure goods for the public sector outside of Wales, and that local sourcing isn't an option. But you know, there's evidence of quite a lot of local authorities now that are starting to think differently and thinking how that local spend has those far wider results, particularly in terms of, you know, if we apply those to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. You know, COVID has maybe been a game changer in many ways for us when we're starting to think about what are the opportunities for our sector. And, you know, with it, when COVID happened and maybe there were supply chain voids, we've seen the public sector really start to prioritise local spend and actually making gaps in supply chains to give third sector organisations more of a chance. But there's also, you know, there's definitely been a change of motivation, and part of the CLES work that we've been doing for Welsh Government, we've been convening with our public service boards conversations with some of our leading sort of social businesses within different areas, and those conversations, you've really seen the door start to open. And I think there's an opportunity now for us to really keep that door open, keep those conversations going, and really look at what else we can do. Within Wales, in 2020, we published a vision and action plan for the social business sector. That was the first for about 15 years. So it was really something that we could look at really differently and really start to lead. And that's called Transforming Wales Through Social Enterprise. And it's got a number of different outcomes in it. But the first outcome is about growing trading with the public sector. And as part of our Social Business Wales work, we've recently mapped the sector. And we found that 44% of our social enterprises in Wales wanted to start trading with the public sector. Levels in Wales of trading with the public sector tend to be lower than through the UK generally. So that is an area that we really want to start to work on. But what we found, people telling us, they kind of build on some of those, I guess, issues that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act Commissioner found. It's making sure that the public sector really start to grow a social business culture, that the officers know about them, they know their local patch. Alison referred to those kind of local assets when we're thinking about social care and how we can think of things differently. Know who's out there, know who you could be working with. Start to join up the good practice, but really start to embed social value when procurement's happening. Real clarity of pipeline as well would also help social business sectors within your regions. There might be opportunities for social businesses to collaborate if they're able to really start and plan that as well. Think about those procurement tools. We've heard that procurement's going to change, in our kind of post-Brexit UK. In Wales, we're not sure what pathway we're going to take with that yet. But, there are tools like reserve contracts, for example, that could be used more often to really start that and give social businesses opportunity to get within the sectors. I was asked to kind of think of what did I feel were the opportunities for the sector moving forward. And I think, if public sector are really thinking about those less than £10,000 spends, there where we can really see, SMEs, we can see micro enterprises, we can see our social business sector really starting to be involved. But also, following on from what Alison said about social care, in Wales, we've got a piece of legislation called the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and Section 16 of that Act really asks commissioners in social care to look at social value models of delivery. And that's something, again, we've been working with Welsh government on for the last 3 years, of looking at how we can transform those services on a local level. I really feel there's opportunities around local food, but also around the retrofit agenda, youth and education services, but also, as we've heard from many before, that these kind of place-based approaches of really doing things differently and procuring things differently and knowing your local area. I think that's where, that's what we're seeing in Wales, and that's the way we really want to take the community wealth building agenda forward and really embedding the social business sector within it. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, that business development piece is so important, and kind of having these, additional structures and mechanisms to support kind of traditional economic development from a local authority point of view is really, really important. Sam, it would be great to get your view next. You did a really good input recently at our housing community of practice, which gave, I think, real insight into how groups of housing associations in particular are using their spend to move beyond community investment and instead, I suppose, work more to kind of develop more purpose driven organizations within supply chains. So yeah, over to you. It'd be great to hear about that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom. Hi everyone. That I'll pick that up amongst some other things, and I've no slides today, but probably I will bullet point a few things for reference, and then we can pick up where we think is most useful to expand on. I guess this is work that's happened for me and various organizations over the last 4 or 5 years. So point one is patience. This takes time, commitment. I think it's already been alluded to. And it takes a reframing of our impact model, especially in housing. We've sort of had community investment arms that have some grant funding and do some incredible things. But our reframing to a sort of total impact, maximizing impact model really started shifting our thinking on this. If you look at, I use Orbit, a previous employer, as an example. We used to invest about 6 million a year into our communities. We also spent 360 million a year across our communities in all of our standard procurement practice. And you only have to present some of that difference to start seeing what impact you really can have if you take a different lens to this. It's also enabled us to sort of widen the impact in our organisation about the impact that people can make in their day-to-day jobs. It doesn't sit with one department, it now sits with everybody. It's now the principle of everybody in their roles to partake in delivering greater value to their communities. And that's something that's actually been quite transformational. You know, procurement isn't a traditional space for people to think that they can make a huge difference, but actually they can make an enormous one. It's brought our environmental drivers to the fore. Again, social value tends to have a different focus, but sort of our vision on impact and community wealth building brings environment forwards. And obviously, as housing associations, many of those that are housed in social housing are more economically deprived, and so getting this right is an immediate driver and success metric for us. And a few things about what we've done. Over time, we have identified a big puzzle to this. There are multiple layers or multiple pieces to try and get this right. From rethinking policy, both internally and externally, to trying to reshape the market. So we've been plugging away at different pieces to this. We've worked on the setup of an organisation called Supply Change, who have helped broker social enterprises, or purpose-driven enterprises, as we like to think about them, with housing associations. They're working right across both the construction space and directly with housing associations. Last year, we set up a dynamic purchasing system for low-level goods and services, directly focused on purpose-driven enterprise, again, trying to lower the barrier of entry for organizations, because it is just difficult. You know, many housing associations are big businesses with big spend, and that immediately takes us out sometimes of our thinking. The DPS that now exists for all public sector, actually, as a small plug, can be used for that. We've set targets with procurement targets, and only last year we did about £2.8 million, which I don't actually know if that's good or bad, but it is a number. And we've now got about 15 to 20 purpose-driven businesses consciously delivering services. And I'll come back to the consciousness piece in a minute. We've also, through what's called the Community Impact Partnership, which was, to a point, Tom, around collaboration, we brought together 4 of the biggest housing associations in the UK. We've been working together for 4 years to invest in purpose-driven enterprise. Again, one of the other puzzle pieces, it's a tough market. When you in our world, we're looking at goods and services, not necessarily care or children's services or anything like that. We do require some sort of scale in the enterprises we work with. We do require certain thresholds to be met. So we've actually invested over £1 million of loan and grant finance to try and back some of these big enterprises into our supply chains. And just rethink, frankly, the social value clauses, rethink what we're asking of our procurement colleagues. Sarah's talked about a number of metrics and mechanisms in procurement, which I won't go back over, but I think we do need procurement colleagues to think a bit more expansively sometimes in what is possible. And so we've brought together what was called the Community Impact Partnership, where we've been investing in enterprises. We've now expanded that. That lending has stopped, and we're actually rethinking the collaboration, which we think will have 10 to 20 housing associations come together and really start thinking about growth hubs for certain construction industries. So rather than these general incubators, but actually think about spend areas that we know we can facilitate, whether it's planned programs. We spend about £70 million a year on kitchens and bathrooms, ground maintenance, cleaning. We did a spend profile, a breakdown of spend profile of 8 housing associations. We're talking billions of pounds every year on very similar things. Sarah, you mentioned retrofit. We're going to spend billions of pounds on that. We know that. So this is an opportunity to bring everyone together, share the risk, make mistakes together, look at success together, but be much more focused. My last point really is about measurement. If we don't measure this properly, and we don't recognize the value of our supply chains other than the amount of social value and number of apprenticeships that they bring, which is, that's 2012 we started doing that. Unless we have a better metric system for understanding what I would call inherent and intentional impact, then we will miss a lot of what our businesses do in our area, because a lot of businesses do amazing things, and we don't ask the right questions, so we never know. So we're at risk of displacing them for people who are just a bit better at saying it on a bit of paper. So we just need a better narrative here. And I think once we've got that, then I'd say people get it. It's really obvious. People love it. Employees love it, and really see the value of it. So those would be my key bullet points. And if people are wondering where to start, I'd go somewhere, just one small thing, because it will take a long time.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Sam. I think what's so important about what you're saying there is it's that reminder that social value is not just about getting a little bit extra out of big extractive providers. It's about changing the nature of supply chains so that we don't have these extractive providers in there anymore, and then we have more of these kind of generative businesses. And that's what's kind of striking about this example from housing. It's it's a complement to kind of progressive economic development, as we would see it. So thanks so much for that, Sam. Donna, I'm going to come over to you now, and we're going to shift probably to talk a little bit more about employment. And we've kind of had some brilliant examples from yourself as well at our NHS community of practice. And when we've been talking to local economic development professionals recently, the need for these kind of pre-employment training programs to connect those furthest from the labour market into employment opportunities in their areas, it seems to be kind of more important than ever. So if we could hear a bit from you about that, that would be fantastic. So over to you, Donna.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the disadvantage of going last is I've got loads of questions and I've now restructured what I'm going to say. So apologies if I keep looking down at my notes. I've reorganised things from hearing from colleagues. So my name is Donna from the Northern Care Alliance. So that covers Bury, Rochdale, Oldham, Salford and Greater Manchester. So we bring together 4 hospitals, specialist and acute services and a range of associated community services. We've got about 8,500 staff and a budget of 1.3 billion. So we're kind of big, working across 4 areas that are really different. The only thing those 4 areas have in common is we provide their health services. They are quite different. So we take quite a place-based approach. So I'm just going to start by reflecting on a quote that our retiring chief exec kind of gave this time last year when he said, and he said this to the wider community and to our staff, is that our potential in the NHS to make a difference to people's lives beyond our normal caring service is significant. And at this time of national crisis, the NHS must stand up and do more than its brilliant work to care for its sick. So we know that health outcomes are driven by 10 to 20% of clinical care, i.e. access and the quality of that care, but 40% of health outcomes are driven by social and economic factors like income, employment, social support, a sense of purpose. So within the NHS, within the NCA, we're starting to challenge ourselves to really go into that space and think about how we can use our 18,500 staff on a £1.3 billion expenditure to improve health outcomes. Now, so for this panel, I've been asked to really focus on what we're doing around people, around workforce. So the traditional narrative has been, we want the best person for the job by sticking an advert out, doing a formal interview and appointing. What we're starting to say actually is if we are really serious about using our power as an employee to reduce poverty and improve health outcomes, is that we need to take a structural approach to what is structural inequalities. So we've set ourselves a challenge that by 2025, we'll have 1,000 pre-employment programs, which pretty much support all our level entry jobs into our organisations. And this year, despite the challenges of a pandemic, we're up to about 380, maybe 400, and we're unashamedly targeting those who face barriers to work. So we've got a mixture of programmes addressing different aspects within our community. So, but what I thought I'd do is pull out kind of what are the 4 successful ingredients to those programmes. So I think the first one is about how to target the communities. And I think the first thing to say is big isn't always best. We're not always the best way of reaching out into communities. So we often find a real secret ingredient is working with our voluntary and faith-based organisations. So just pull out 2. We've got a really good programme with Positive Steps with the youth outcome. We thought we'd get about 30% of young people. These are young people on the edge of care, in care, or send young people. We've now got 70% of those are into paid work or onto further education. So that's doubled what we initially thought. And that's because they are the broker. Another programme we started off with a place-based initiative in one of our council wards, which is predominantly BME communities. It was so well received by our communities. The mosque is now funding it and is asking us to use the mosque, as that's where we do the community engagement. We recruit and we actually do some classroom learning using the mosque. We wouldn't have got into those communities without those doors to open. I think the second secret ingredient is the pre-employment programmes need to be job specific but flexible. So we often find there's 380 careers within the NHS and social care, and people tend to know about doctors and nurses. So we work with people to kind of say, this is what the range of opportunities, and start from a strength-based. So we guarantee that all of our pre-employment learners will go into an actual job, and we're finding that because it's actually getting into that meaningful work, because 6 weeks working, coming up to work for free in terms of doing your pre-employment and doing your work shadowing is a better judgment of job readiness than perhaps a 20-minute interview. I guess the third thing, which kind of was a bit surprising at how strongly this is coming through, it's a 2-way process. So every time I speak to a line manager, a tutor, or a mentor, they tell me that they've learned something from the person who they've been engaged with. So I'm just going to illustrate that with 2 stories. So the first was Sophia. So she came through the youth programme Positive Steps that I talked about. So she left school with no qualifications and pretty much for 12 months hadn't really left a family home without a family member. And I can remember meeting her on the first day and she was visibly shaking, and the youth worker had to go to her home and walk her to the hospital. She lived within walking distance of us. The next time I saw her, she was on a work placement in our vaccination hubs. So she arrived at the time we were setting up the vaccination hubs. And what she actually, just in a real quiet, unassuming way, she gave tips to our staff to say, shouldn't we have a corner where we put toys? Because what happens if people bring kids? And actually to see her, because she spoke community languages and we had nobody else in the team who did. So she was able to engage with the community at a point that nobody else in that staff team were able to do. So to see her confidence grow was just amazing. And actually, but she really helped us think about actually how should we set up these community hubs, because in terms of what her experience that she could bring. The second one is we've had a few kickstarts come through. So we put a young woman in with our phlebotomy team. So those who don't know the NHS as well as me, phlebotomies are like the heart of your hospital. They go around the hospital and they bleed patients, and without a blood test, you can't really do much. So they're pretty critical. So she went into those teams, and after the end of the first week, she said, can I make a few suggestions? You all come in at the same time and you all set up your trolleys. What if I came in 20 minutes early and I'll do that for you? You all then, if you don't have something, you all have to come back to base if you've run out something on your trolley. What if you have set up a WhatsApp group? Because I might have been next door, but you didn't know. Just in those 2 little suggestions, we now can see 40 more patients a day. That's 40 more patients. That's over a ward worth of patients are getting their blood tests quicker, which means their whole journey is speeded up. Small, simple thing. But as the manager said, we're all women over 40. We hadn't even thought about WhatsApp. We didn't know what that was. But simple interventions that she could just do by bringing in that new. So I guess my third ingredient, which kind of flows from something Sam says, is about the importance of measurement. So I spend, as Tom knows, I'm a bit of a data geek. I every quarter go through our staff characteristics, go through where do people live, map that against protected characteristics, and that's how we're then saying, well, which is the communities that we're going into. So the first data set I used was January 19. We had 45% of our staff were local. So we define local as living within our 4 boroughs. We're now at 57%. So that just intentional of really being clear, where do people live against where the communities that we serve. And I guess my final kind of the cherry on the top of my secret ingredient is the work that Professor Martin West has done that showed that care provided by diverse, respectful teams produce better outcomes. So by targeting our underrepresented communities who face barriers to employment, we're supporting our intentional inclusion strategy. So our programs are really place-based. Some across the group in terms of, we've got a program with the Proud Trust that focus on young LGBTQ+, others are really focused on specific communities. So whilst often I start by saying we need to take off our caregiving hat and consider our economic and social power, perhaps it's not that million miles away from our core business if we take it through those lenses. I'm just conscious of time and desperate to get to some discussion. So back to you, Tom.
Thanks so much, Donna. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's just that real reminder for me that, you know, we can't just rely on kind of, you know, established national initiatives. It's about getting in there with the data, as you point out, understanding what the profile is in terms of kind of who you're employing, where they're from, and then developing those interventions to be as inclusive as possible. Yeah, there's lots of questions coming in. I might just kind of ask you all one first, really, just to kind of go back to the notion of partnerships that we started with, and just to dig in a little bit more, because obviously it's so different across the UK. You know, obviously when Mr. Tom Arthur was speaking before, in Scotland they've got community planning partnerships. There's this really kind of established structure that's already there. But yeah, I'm just interested a little bit in the kind of partnership arrangements that might be helping you in place. Alison, if I could come to you first, I know that partnership in Wigan has always been strong. Is that derived from the old local strategic partnership infrastructure, or have kind of new partnerships emerged? What's going on there?
I think it's more new partnerships. So we've certainly obviously invested through the deal, probably now in excess of £12 million into social enterprise. So that's really sort of, I suppose, really strengthened our partnership with the community sectors. I think there's a question in there in terms of sort of growing that SME sector and social enterprises. That's taken a different approach. So it's taken an investment approach. So not, you know, we could be paternalistic and direct what that was, but actually if you just put a pot of money aside and ask people to come forward with solutions, it creates much more of an ecosystem of people having their own creativity, knowing what's needed within their own communities and knowing what some of the issues are. So we've definitely tried to invest year on year to grow our community sector. And the partnerships, we've taken a much more holistic approach to the partnerships. So, you know, bringing on board the private sector within some of the community wealth building work, really pushing hard on some of the active partnerships that we've got now in the community wealth building work as well. So old partnerships and new partnerships, I think, Tom, is the way to describe it. And that real understanding and listening to each other.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Sorry, thanks, Donna. Yeah, I mean, you've got your own community of practice that you've established as well. Is that key to kind of helping you with your partners in that area, would you say?
Yeah, so we work a community practice methodology. We bring, because our 4 localities are quite different. So in effect, we've got like a Wigan book times 4, if you like. So what we try to do is to say how can we share and learn and respect the differences within those communities, but also where we can enable stuff across group. It just enables us to scale where we can, but recognise there is still the uniqueness of those places. It's also really good for it to try and bring the organisation together. When you're working in large organisations, it is the power of the story. It is bringing everyone together. Because I always say this is like a social movement with a trajectory is how I describe it. So we've got, so this is, about in terms of really challenging people to think differently, but do that within the confidence of an organisational structure, but being purposeful with this, because you could actually spend a lot of time not really getting anywhere unless you're really purposeful where you're trying to go. So community practice, it kind of worked because we're trying to do this virtually, because obviously we can't bring people together at the minute. So actually we do it virtually, and yeah, so we're having our third, and we record it, and that's that, and then we can then from that then flows the next board report that says, well, where is our next ambition going? So quite often people say, can I have your strategy? And we kind of say, I haven't really got a written strategy. I've got a series of ambitions, I've got a mission, and I've got a methodology, and that the strategy is down to the place-based leaders to kind of co-design through the partnerships that are either in existing or by creating new ones.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, and Sarah, you mentioned the PSB structure in Wales, and is that kind of it's slightly strange structure. Do you want to say something a little bit more about that for kind of the rest of the audience, and why that's kind of helping you kind of work with partners?
Yeah, with the CLES work, we've been working, each local authority has got a public service board that's made up of, obviously the local authority and the other public sector organisations there, but also the, the key anchors, so the housing associations, the universities, colleges, etc. So they're, sometimes, some third sector organisations are invited to those groups, but what they were telling us is we might be there, but we're not asked to speak. We don't really get a voice at the table, and I think that probably follows on from what Donna was saying. It's great having those places around the table, but I think it's being listened to as well and being seen as a key partner, to be listened to, and when those decisions are being made. And I think as a social business sector in Wales, what we've been trying to do is, there's a number of other organisations such as the Welsh Council for Voluntary Action, Social Firms Wales, we've got Unlimited, the Development Trust Association Wales, is we've been trying to work together as a group. So we're seeing a bit more cohesive as a sector. And I think that's really helped strengthen our voice. That kind of partnership working, Tom, is definitely getting us a place at the table, and for our members and our individual organisations too, I think, to be listened to. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, just on the partnerships point to you. Obviously, you've got these partnerships that you're forming with other housing associations. Have you started to think about how you might link into other anchor institutions like the local authority and connect, I suppose, what that economic development power that you've got, and you kind of at your disposal, and kind of, I suppose, wrap that into what the local authority might be doing?
No. Not sure if as a panelist I should say that. There's two angles to us. The report that I've just seen a final copy on, which was a big deep dive of our role here. It does two things. One, I explained, is to tackle the category management of procurement, and that is very much a housing collaboration piece. The second one is a place-based piece, and I can't speak for the whole sector, and I wouldn't want to, especially as it's not a positive point. We're not wonderful collaborators locally, particularly the big ones that cover, we used to cover 126 local authorities. Our focus is dispersed, and I think that's something we've got to improve, or be called to the table on. I don't think we have that sort of local vision, except where the housing provider remains local. That I think is, and I'm not I can't speak on behalf of them because I don't work for them. So, but I know many that are brilliant. But I think housing should be called to the table much more strongly on this. I think especially when you referenced earlier, quite often we have sort of development-based regeneration. So that the role of a housing provider is fundamental. So I'm sorry, that's not the most positive answer to it, but I think it's the honest one. I think we could be better.
No, it's all good, because I just think there is that real potential. I mean, Alison, I don't know whether you've done much work with housing associations in this way, because I think there is that they're almost like a potential driver of economic development, as I see it.
I think, well, we've got some sort of alternative models of delivery with housing providers we're trying to work through, but maybe some related examples to what we were just talking about. Certainly our new build and regeneration team have adopted the national framework for social value, and what that's done is seeing housing tenders and contracts and really assess the commitments under that framework. And what we've had now is a cumulative value pledged of around £500,000 from contractors and consultants. So that's really sort of taken a different approach. We've also, through our building and associated works framework, provided a real great opportunity for the small to medium enterprises to apply and be successful, because previously it was a much larger number of individual lots. So what we've got now is an evaluation weighting of 20% for community wealth building to ensure that we work with businesses that are committed to the borough. And the outcome of that has seen 75% of prime and 89% of reserve providers being based in the Wigan borough. So that's sort of some progress at least. But linking to what Sam said, what we've tried to do is start to think about new models of alternative housing. So we're working with a community housing organisation that's developing new homes at land provided by a church. And what this is doing, it's helping buyers reduce their deposit by offering what we class as that sweat equity. So we're supporting the housing provider to sort of really navigate some of the difficulties that they often have with planning and legal issues and funding issues. And we've got them some help with some of the project management and cost plannings from a local provider, a local organisation as part of their community wealth building commitments when they have contracts with the council. So I suppose it's developing initiatives like this where you can get a very much a different community-led housing model approach, and therefore you can get support and really encourage, I suppose smaller and initiatives across the borough. So we've been doing lots of work around that. We're also doing some work around piloting our empty home strategy. So trying to look at mixed methods of bringing homes back that were empty and problematic. So really looking at, I suppose, in those particular pieces of work, trying to maximise skill development and employment opportunities for local residents, but really sort of trying to embrace a different approach to some of the housing development work.
Thanks, Alison. Yes, Sam, did you want to come in?
I'm not going to take over facilitating questions here. I think there's an interesting one. I'm seeing some of the chat as well between the sort of trying to bring it down to a small scale and trying to change some of the construction of how we think about the large scale, because it takes a long time. It takes a lot of facilitation internally with business within your own organizations to change mindset and culture and everything. And I think we can run sort of breaking this up into, whether Carol's talked about community-led housing and things. These are great models and they should be welcomed and championed and built on. But we will never get away from some of this large scale contracting. It just, the economics just stack up for big organizations. And so I think there needs to be a twin track here about really changing the challenge we set to these big organizations and support organizations who are ambitious to scale, who are just inherently impactful, how they work, who they appoint, who their employees are. There's some wonderful organizations across the UK that are masters at this. That's my point really. I don't want us to go one way or another here. I think we do have to cover both bases.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I'm conscious that there's lots of questions going on in the audience, so maybe it's time to kind of bring some of those in. Carl Asprey is kind of intrigued, Alison, about the Wigan deal, and I think we probably all kind of chip into this on some level. But your point about kind of growing mutuals, communities, social enterprises, cooperatives, etc. How do we do this without being paternalistic? Is what Carl is asking.
I think I probably referenced some of that earlier. So I think the work that we've done on the Community Investment Fund, so putting our money where our mouth is and putting a slot out, determining what needs to be done with it is not paternalistic in my view. I think what we've said to people is here's a fund, you bid into it, the criteria is pretty loose, we're not going to monitor you like crazy, and you're the best people who know what the solutions are to some of the issues in your community. So that feels a different way of, you know, not being top down and paternalistic. Obviously, we need to have a few checks and balances in there because of audit issues, but we've tried to really, I suppose, make it less bureaucratic and much more creative. Our staff are really encouraged to listen and not come up with solutions. So we, you know, we're sort of from a cultural perspective, we've been on a journey for many years where staff are really encouraged to sort of step back and listen and not be paternalistic. So very much around, you know, listen to what a community enterprise is saying, listening to what residents are saying. So really changing that sort of paternalistic mindset. So from a culture point of view, and I suppose from an investment point of view, that's what we've tried to do. You know, it's still a journey. We're a political organisation, and you know, we're still learning lessons ourselves. But it's with intent that we've tried to change that approach.
Great, thanks, Alison. Sarah, I don't know whether you've got a view on this from your work and research that you've done.
I don't think I can add much to what Alison's just said, really. I think that most of us would be adopting, you know, similar approaches and similar thinking to what's been going on in Wigan.
Yeah.
But really thinking long term about these things as well, I think, as we're developing organisations.
Yeah. No, great stuff, Sarah. Yeah. And I suppose it'd be interesting to dig into it a little bit more from, so Caroline Wilson is asking, how do we deploy economic development resource to support a more locally competitive market? Because I mean, there's a lot of resource within economic development that has traditionally thought about kind of, you know, big scale regeneration, property development type stuff, inward investment. How are you doing that, Alison, within Wigan, shifting resource?
The work that we're doing on community wealth building is a whole organisation, whole partnership approach. So us being signed up for this movement, us all understanding that this isn't just a project in one part of the organisation is really, really important. So I think collectively we're coming together. So whether you're working in economic regeneration or in adult social care or, you know, in the corporate centre, we have a really sort of, you know, a whole approach, a whole systems approach to community wealth building. So that's really, really important that it's seen as, one of the speakers earlier talked about that it's much more around that sort of internal external partnership. So I suppose it's not about shifting resource, it's about all believing in it. That's the most important thing for me. It's getting a sense that this is really important to the organisation and all believing in, you know, the fact that we want an economy that works for all parts of the borough. Sam did say we're never going to sort of, you know, we're going to have a mixed economy, aren't we, where we're still going to have, you know, some of that sort of private enterprise, but it's about encouraging those new models. So I referenced earlier that example of the new build and regeneration team adopting the National TOMS framework, and that's certainly seen a different approach and different commitments by suppliers, and then breaking down some of our building and associated works framework into much more smaller lots to really help some of those small to medium enterprises. So yeah, you know, lots of examples where we're trying to do that, but for me, it's not so much about shifting resource, it's about getting behind this, always getting behind it, and not seeing it as a sort of separate project in one part of the system. And that's the most important thing.
Thanks, Alison. Donna, I don't know whether you've got a view on this, because obviously you're not just focusing on employment, are you over at the Northern Carolina? You had a whole session on procurement that I attended earlier this year. That's where you're kind of getting into thinking, well, what's the NHS's spend role within this? I don't know whether you'd like to come in on that.
Yes, I mean, as colleagues on the call may know, we've got a lot of the NHS funding is not totally within our power to spend. So what we actually did was be quite realistic to say, actually, there's a tension policy terms in terms of it's still very much NHS buy together, buy big together, as opposed to buy big locally. And that gives us real tension. So what we actually did was we broke all that down. We worked with a youth organisation did a little video to describe that, to say, actually, although we say it's 1.2 billion, here's some stuff that we directly control, and here's some stuff that actually is part of national frameworks. So we've kind of set ourselves a target of a 10% shift on what it is within ourselves locally to, we've got more control over, if you like. And then we've been really open with our local authority partners to say, this is the space that we really feel we could shift some local spend. And there were some other stuff that it's not impossible, but it's harder. So we can have that conversation, because I think otherwise, if you don't know where to start, and I'm not sure, Tom, you've heard this, like I'm obsessed at the minute about window cleaners. Window cleaners is totally within our gift. But at the moment we set one contract for all of our 4 hospitals plus all community. Well, there's no local window cleaners going to do that. But it's really difficult for me to find the infrastructure organisation who could get all the single window cleaners together and get them to create something that means they could accept that contract. So use that as quite a real example, but I think we're trying to go out purposefully, was this is the problem we're trying to fix. So, you know, so that we can then work with, so we've got the Grove Company in Manchester, we've got other people that we're trying to say, so where would we go to have that conversation? Because actually this is the spend we can shift, whereas food, that's nationally supplied for the NHS, so we can talk to people about how to get onto the national framework, but that's going to be harder. But actually window cleaning we can do, but we don't know how. So I think quite often it's probably picking up some of the stuff that Sam said. It's starting with a practical example and to say, so who can help you work in shifting a lens towards that, and just almost throwing that problem out there to say, you know, who's a friend who can help work that through. So if anyone knows any window cleaners locally, I'm still on the lookout.
That's great. Thanks, Donna. I'm conscious of time and that we need to kind of start maybe, well, we do need to start drawing. There's no maybe about it. We need to start drawing this to an end. But it'd be great to kind of get some final reflections from each of you on the discussion, and or if you had anything that you know that anyone else has sparked that you want to kind of comment on. So maybe if I go around and I'll start with you, Alison, so go in the order that we kicked off with.
That's the problem when your first name begins with an A, isn't it? You tend to get pocket calls from you, the top on someone's mailing list in the telephone book, and then on this. So I've listened really intently and learned lots from Donna and Sam and Sarah and you, Tom, and obviously from Sarah and Tom previously, and look forward to listening to the rest of the conversation. We've published our Growing an Economy, I'm looking at it here now, Growing an Economy that Works for All People of the Borough annual report. And within this, we've got some priorities for 2022 and beyond. So I'm just looking at them and I suppose reflecting and challenging myself. Are we being bold and courageous enough, I suppose, is the first question. And then secondly, we probably just need to get on with it and start doing some of the things like Donna said in terms of let's get some real actions going. So I suppose the focus for me is the more that we can act, the better. So it's getting on with it and really focusing in on what we're trying to achieve here.
Thanks, Alison.
Yeah,
Sarah?
I think it's been really good listening, you know, to the example in Scotland where, you know, and in Wigan too, where you've seen things really start to join up. And I think that's what we need to do next in Wales. I think it's been great having the focus on procurement, but I think, you know, if Welsh Government want to really look at, you know, thinking about our wellbeing economy, you know, we're signed up to that as well, thinking about the foundational economy principles, thinking about employee ownership, thinking about community wealth building. Let's join it up and see how we can really make that impact really happen, and how that can really, you know, and the role our social businesses can play in that. So that's what I'd like to see. I think definitely got some inspiration to keep the nagging going, I think.
Thanks, Sarah. Sam, just briefly from you.
Yeah, loads to take away. It's always nice to hear people are getting on with it, which is ultimately what this is all about. We've got to find a better way to measure this, I think. We've got to find a better way to collaborate effectively. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. And Donna, just final words from you.
My granny used to always say you have 2 ears, 2 eyes and 1 mouth for a reason. I think in this space it's really clear that kind of listening and observing kind of is really really critical. So I put my email in the chat because I know there was a few questions specifically about DBS and different things, so really happy to carry those on because I think the more we talk to each other and the more we can learn and the more we can kind of accelerate what we're doing. So thanks for facilitating this, Tom.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And thanks so much to you all. That's been a really, really good discussion and conversation. I'm going to hand back over to Sarah now for some final reflections on this morning's events.
Thanks very much, Tom. And wow, what a morning. I've got that feeling where you've just got light bulbs coming on in your head all the time. You know, we started with Tom really kind of throwing down the challenge to England to embrace community wealth building and make the most of it. And I guess giving us a real sense of the scale of ambition in Scotland and how it has really become a part of not just what they do, but the philosophy with which they're trying to run the economy. And then we've just, of course, had Alison, Sarah, Sam, and Donna and Tom. And wow, I mean, there is a lot going on out there. And the thing that really struck me was that this isn't just about how we tweak the measurements or how we try to understand social value, important though that is, but it's actually about social change. And that requires us, I suppose, to think about, well, what is the scale of our appetite, the scale of our ambition to do community wealth building, to kind of work through those 5 pillars that Tom reminded us of this morning. You know, that as we move along those pillars, what are we really trying to achieve? And I think what it really comes home to me is it isn't just about what we do on the systems and the processes, but it's how we change the mindsets, the culture. As Alison said, you know, how we kind of believe in it. In an economy that really works for everyone. So I just want to say a massive thanks to all of our speakers this morning and all of the CLES team working behind the scenes to try and make sure that everything has run smoothly. I also want to thank again our partners, without whom this event would be possible. So Barrow Cadbury Trust, the Democracy Collaborative and Power to Change. And a huge thank you to our keynote speaker this morning, Mr. Tom Arthur MSP, and our panelists that you've just heard from, Alison McKenzie-Folan, Sarah Evans, Sam Scharf, Donna McLaughlin, and to Tom for chairing the session. Before you head off on your long lunch break, please don't forget to think about what you're going to do on Monday and what you've learned. Perhaps something came up this morning which was a bit of a light bulb moment for you. Make sure you remember to put it on your form and send it through to us. And the link is being put in the chat as I speak. And don't forget also to keep sharing your thoughts and comments on the chat box. It's been brilliant to see all of the comments and to see who else is out there listening and discussing these issues with us. And you can also, of course, on Twitter as well, interact with us on the hashtag CWB Summit. So, and again, if you're struggling with any technical issues throughout the day or indeed throughout the week, please do drop a line to my colleague Lisa and she will sort you out. Finally, I just wanted to say a special hello to the chair of the CLES Board of Trustees, Jill Stewart. Jill really wanted to be with us this morning to give us her thoughts, but unfortunately Jill isn't very well at the moment, and so I just wanted to use this opportunity to pay tribute for her fantastic support and help with everything that we do at CLES, and indeed to all of our CLES trustees, and to wish her a really speedy recovery in the next few weeks. So thanks so much for joining me and the rest and the whole of the CLES team and our speakers. I'll be in as many sessions as I can be over the week, but if I don't see you in a session, I will definitely see you when we come back here again on Friday. So enjoy your lunch and thanks very much.